Hello, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's the 24th of February. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. My apologies for us starting a little bit late this evening. The technology has not been helping us at all this evening, but we're here now. As you would imagine, we're going to spend a fair amount of this evening discussing the events surrounding the Russian invasion of Ukraine. However, if there is time, we will discuss some other news items that we have today. However, for both those items, I'm going to say that we are joined this evening by the MP for West Dunbartonshire, Martin Docherty-Hughes. Martin's been the MP for West Dunbartonshire since the election in May 2015. And if I'm correct, he has been a member of the SNP's defence team since 2015. He sits on the House of Commons Defence Committee and is also Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Russia. Martin, good evening, and did I get that mini CV correct?
Ever so slightly. I've just recently left the Defence Select Committee to concentrate on other things, but I've still got my dab hand in working with the Defence team.
Thanks, Martin, and lots of experience as well. So we're delighted, and we're delighted to have you this evening, and we're very grateful to you for your time and for coming along and joining us on Scotland at 7.
Pleasure to be here, Andrew.
So, Martin, the news today, obviously, we're in a situation of a very quickly developing situation with all of the challenges that reporting from a live combat zone brings us. We can see large media organisations scrambling to deploy their resources to cover events. But obviously a situation like this, which is developing very quickly on the ground and also in a number of gaps and the West, is difficult to report happening in the news. So in accordance with the way we often do things on Broadcasting Scotland, I thought that we would have a broader discussion of some of the implications and some of the aspects of what we can see so far today, and perhaps use this as an opportunity to reflect a little bit more on what we do know and what we think might happen next, rather than trying to report on events that are happening on a battlefield a couple of thousand miles away. So I was thinking about talking to you in the context of thinking about the implications of today's events for NATO, the implications for the EU and for global politics perhaps. Obviously there are implications for Russia and for the UK, and perhaps most importantly or most seriously, without a doubt, there are implications for citizens and families living in Ukraine. And I thought it would be relevant to have to consider them as well, because I know that they were commented on this afternoon by Ian Blackford MP when he was talking in the debate in the House of Commons. So I thought that we would look at the current circumstances from a range of different perspectives and perhaps see if we can shed a little light on things in that way. And I should check before we get started, Martin, were you in the House of Commons this afternoon when Boris Johnson was making his statement?
No, I was actually en route on the train from London this morning back home to Scotland, actually.
Of course. No, I understand. It was just to make sure that I didn't put you in the wrong place at the wrong time. But let's start looking at events that we have. Firstly, I was going to talk to you about in light of the invasion which started at 5 a.m. Local time this morning, and the reports that we have seen of Russian forces crossing the border into Ukraine, into the self-proclaimed regions in the east of Ukraine, and also apparently military operations in the air over Ukraine today. We've seen statements this afternoon from Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, and I was wondering, first of all, what you think the implications of today's events are going to be for NATO. I was wondering, do you think that in fact having a focus has perhaps unified NATO, and if it has unified it, what do you think that NATO should now be doing, and what can it do now?
I think it's interesting. First of all, if we talk about occupied Ukraine, I often hear people talk about the annexation of Crimea and Donbass and Donetsk. These are occupied by the Russian Federation since 2014 by the Putin regime, and the continued invasion of the Ukrainian state, which, as you said, Andrew, started this morning at 5 a.m. local time. In terms of NATO and its posture for the foreseeable future, I think it's clear that there is no intention to participate in a ground war or a ground offensive against the occupation of Ukraine. I think what there is a clear determination to give countries like the Baltic states, Estonia, which I'm the co-chair of the All-Party Group, which celebrated its 104th year of its declaration of its independence from the old Russian Empire, actually today. Lithuania and Latvia as well, they will have grave concerns about the future direction of Vladimir Putin's military machine. And I think they will be slightly less concerned given the additional troops that have been sent to the Baltic borders with the Russian Federation and with other non-NATO nations, notably Belarus, which, let's all be very clear, is now an occupied state. Part of the fiefdom of the Greater Russian Federation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Martin. I wasn't thinking so much about the immediate prospect of military action by NATO, as you say. Ukraine is not a member of that organisation, and so there's no obligation on NATO to intervene on behalf of Ukraine. And also, the NATO has been clear that it will not. I was wondering, however, that in terms of perhaps bringing a focus of purpose and of voice back to NATO, that these events might do that. And also, I was wondering, you were talking there about Estonia and Lithuania. I was wondering whether one of the outcomes from this invasion is that, in fact, we might begin to see redoubling of efforts in enlarging NATO. I'm thinking, for example, the situation of ultimately of Ukraine, perhaps, but thinking more immediately of countries, for example, like Finland.
Well, I think tomorrow what you'll see is, first of all, Finland and Sweden will be joining the meeting of NATO heads of state, which I believe will be taking place. And Sweden and Finland have both been invited, and they've made it clear as their intention to be there. I think there is now also a clear debate over the last 5 years, very much so in Finland, about whether or not they need to move to apply for full NATO membership. I think the Prime Minister of Finland has said in the last couple of months that it's, we don't see it as in the near future, but if events change, then our minds will probably change. And I think the events have overtaken everyone, which I find quite a surprise that people are surprised. And I have to say, I think Finland might be moving now more towards considering becoming a full member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I think Sweden, which is very interesting, given its history in the Baltics and across Ukraine as well over the last couple of 100 years. I think there will be, of course, serious considerations in Sweden about how they now go forward in terms of its military considerations of the impact of the Russian Federation. And I think there will be given serious consideration to where they go next, whether or not that's to full membership of NATO. I don't know, but I think we also need to recognise there is close working between Sweden's military structure and the NATO alliance already. So there is a close working relationship there, but it's certainly not a formal member of the alliance yet.
Absolutely. Thanks, Martin. What we should then think about is that the next multinational, international non-governmental organisation I was thinking of is of course the EU, and we've seen Ursula von der Leyen speaking today, and I think we have a video of that will run later on during the programme. However, I was wondering, as you say, NATO, with Ukraine not being a member of NATO, there is no obligation on NATO under Article 5 to defend Ukraine, defend Ukrainian territory. In terms of the EU then, what do you think that the EU's role could be or should be? This, after all, there's a view that this an attempted revision of all of Europe's post-Cold War security infrastructure And of course, there's the idea that any democratic independent nation with a border with Russia may now be under threat from what might be described as a neo-imperial Russia. So what do you think the EU's
Well,
role could be or should be?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's just about being an independent nation with a border with Russia. I think is an independent nation with a border with any other oligarchy or one-party state. I think needs to have serious concerns about the break in the international order. When it comes to the EU, I think I need to be, from my perspective, Andrew, is that there's a missed opportunity in making sure that Ukraine became a part of the did not become part of the European Union. I think it was a real missed opportunity to say to actually, Ukraine has a range of serious issues. Nevertheless, it would be better to bring Ukraine straight into the European Union as quickly as possible, given the ramifications of having such a large neighbour such as the Russian Federation. And there's a clear military aspect to that, because what everyone forgets is the Lisbon Treaty. And Article 42.7 of the Lisbon Treaty is about common defence. And there are some who would say that Article 42.7 of the Lisbon Treaty is actually far more robust than Article 5, because it calls upon every member state of the European Union to bring to yield every element of military, economic, policy and support to defend another EU state. So I think people forget that element of the EU already exists, and we might not have been in this position if Ukraine had been welcomed into the EU quite early.
That's a very good point that you make, Martin. In terms of Vladimir Putin's statements, he's been making a great deal about what he asserts is the threat to Russian security posed by NATO. Now, I've not, and maybe I've not heard it. I've not heard him expressing those same concerns with regard to the EU. So, do you think that there might be a possibility then, if it is less controversial in the mind of Vladimir Putin, that the EU could take urgent steps to begin to accelerate the process of accession for Ukraine?
I think that's now past. I think the opportunity for Ukraine at this moment in time to accede to the European Union while it is undergoing occupation by an oligarch and a tyrant, I think we can put that, I have to say, quite frankly, in the back burner. That's not going to happen anytime soon, and it would probably only happen, or could only happen, once the Russian Federation fully, totally and utterly withdraws its forces from the entirety of the sovereign territory of Ukraine, including Crimea, the Donbass, etc. It wouldn't happen at this moment in time.
Well, that I suppose feeds into the broader point that I think we'll talk about, which is also in terms of, if we accept as a presumption that what we're seeing from Vladimir Putin is an approach that we've seen from him before, which is that he takes a step, assesses the response, and then, depending upon that response, will take the next step. And so it's not necessarily that there is a clearly defined escalations. It is instead that he will recalibrate at each. He will pause and recalibrate at each step. Do you think that there would be an opportunity here for the EU to begin to indicate that as soon as invading Russian forces are removed from Ukraine, that the EU would make it a priority to pursue accession for Ukraine in order to prevent this from ever happening again?
Yeah, I think we should, the European Union, which sadly we are no longer a member of, I think should be concentrating first of all on places like Moldova. I think there really needs now to be a push to make sure that Moldovan accession to the European Union is swift, it's quick. It's one of the most poorest nations, if not the poorest nation in the European continent, and today it opened its borders to most probably millions of Ukrainian refugees fleeing the tyranny of Vladimir Putin. So I think we need to deal with the realistic elements that Ukraine is where it is at the moment in terms of its the invasion by the Russian Federation, and we should be asking our EU partners to consider the accession of Moldova as quickly as possible. I think any compromise in that allows us to lose the democratic ability to keep Moldova in the long-term future.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, thank you, Martin. So, having spoken about the EU for a few minutes there, I think it's probably now time that we take a look at the statement made by Ursula von der Leyen, the EU president, this earlier today.
Good morning. Early this morning, Russian troops invaded Ukraine, a free and sovereign country. And once again, in the center of Europe, innocent women, men and children are dying of fear for their lives. We condemn this barbaric attack and the cynical arguments to justify it. It is President Putin who is bringing war back to Europe. And in these dark hours, the European Union and its people stand by Ukraine and its people. We are facing an unprecedented act of aggression by the Russian leadership against a sovereign, independent country. Russia's target is not only Donbas. The target is not only Ukraine. The target is the stability in Europe and the whole of the international peace order. And we will hold President Putin accountable for that. Later today, we will present a package of massive and targeted sanctions to European leaders for approval. With this package, we will target strategic sectors of the Russian economy by blocking their access to technologies and markets that are key for Russia. We will weaken Russia's economic base and its capacity to modernize. And in addition, we will freeze Russian assets in the European Union and stop the access of Russian banks to European financial markets. Like with the first package of sanctions, we are closely aligned with our partners and allies, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, but also, for example, Japan and Australia. These sanctions are designed to take a heavy toll on the Kremlin's interests and their ability to finance war. And we know that millions of Russians do not want war. President Putin is trying to turn the clock back to the times of the Russian Empire. But in doing so, he is putting at risk the future of the Russian people. I call on Russia to immediately stop the violence and to withdraw its troops from Ukraine's territory. We will not let President Putin tear down the security architecture that has given Europe peace and stability over many decades. We will not allow President Putin to replace the rule of law by the rule of force and ruthlessness. He should not underestimate the resolve and strength of our democracies. And history has proven that societies and alliances built on trust and freedom are resilient and successful. And that's exactly what the autocrats fear. The European Union stands with Ukraine and its people. We will continue to support them. Ukraine will prevail.
So that was also Ursula von der Leyen making a statement in Brussels this afternoon, which I think nicely ties up the discussion we just had there, Martin, with regard to the situation relating to the EU. I was also going to ask you briefly with regard to think a little bit about the implication of Russia for a moment. Is this reversion to military invasions and expressions of military power? Is this all about the autocrat Putin's domestic politics and an attempt to develop a personal legacy for him? Or he's spoken from time to time about his views regarding Ukraine. So is this the completion of, or the action of, a long-held personal ambition and a way of reasserting his domination of domestic Russian politics?
Well, just before I answer that really good question, Andrew, to say just on the point of Ursula von der Leyen's statement is
Please.
the answer for her is that she needs to move quickly and swiftly to ensure the accession of Moldova into the European Union. If you leave it as long as they left Ukraine and allowed it to be undermined by fake news and the Russian political system, then it's at grave risk. So I would say that that really needs to be pushed by partners in the European Union. In terms of Vladimir Putin's legacy, his legacy is going to be the environmental degradation of the Arctic tundra and Siberia. It's going to be the impoverishment of the Russian people. It's going to be in enabling the profound impact of drug abuse and alcohol abuse within the Russian Federation. And it's going to be, if he wants to be an imperialist, he will be mimicking the policies of every emperor that ever existed in the Russian Empire, like any empire in the world, which impoverished the weak and which reduced people to serfs. So that will be his legacy. It won't just be the blood of Ukraine in his hands. It's going to be the continued impoverishment of his own people. And you can see that in the way in which he seeks to use the state apparatus. That's why he and so many others since the Yeltsin years have utilized their own friendships and personal relationships to feather their own nests. I mean, he has one of the largest houses, I think, built anywhere in Europe, one of these big places out in the east, which is quite extraordinary to see a man who says he talks about the Russian people and standing up for the Russian people, who many of them, especially in Eastern Russia, live in absolute poverty. That'll be his legacy. It won't be about empowering Russia. It won't be about leading them to ending poverty or getting food on the table for people in the far east of Russia or those who live in Siberia. It will just be more far right reactionary nonsense which impoverishes everyone, not just the Russian people.
Now, that's a good point. And before we leave Russia, it certainly crossed my mind thinking of Putin's statement with regard to what he described as the denazification of Ukraine. And that has attracted comment from a number of people. And I was just wondering, is that an indication of Putin projecting himself onto others in the same kind of way that we saw Donald Trump do many, many times? And by projecting, I mean asserting that others are displaying the behaviour that he himself is actually displaying. And it's a way of distracting. I'm also thinking of, is he perhaps ghosting people, perhaps literally, with recollections of what Russians refer to as the Great Patriotic War, and he's in a sense maybe using the memory of the Great Patriotic War in the way that other Soviet leaders did, which was to cover over everything else that happened afterwards.
Yeah, coming from Clydebank, I find this quite offensive that he's, my parents and my grandparents suffered the indignity of the aerial bombardment of National Socialism, and luckily my family survived, but 8 million Ukrainians didn't. And today they are led by Europe's only Jewish head of state, President Zelensky, who is a democratically elected president of a European country who happens to be Jewish. And I find this an affront not only to all those who fought, not just in Ukraine, but across the whole of the former Soviet Union against National Socialism. And it's an affront to their memory and an affront to everybody who fought against Hitler in the Second World War. The guy's not just ghosting, he's rewriting history. This is nothing new. Hitler tried to do the exact same, and others like him. There's nothing new in any of this. It's just an absolute tragedy that no one thought for a minute that this would happen, when many people, I know many of my colleagues, including myself as a former member of the Defence Select Committee, were saying, look up, look forward, see what's coming, and why aren't we doing anything about this? It's an affront to the memory of all those who died. It's a scandal, and the man has no shame.
Absolutely. We will come back to the people of Clydebank before we finish this evening. It's something that I know I wanted to talk to you about, and I think we can have a conversation about that. But for the moment, I was going to talk to you a little bit about the implications for the UK. And inevitably, and it's been on people's lips this week, again, having been a matter of discussion for several months. Do you think that there is now the possibility that the London Grad laundromat is really going to be closed down, or are the Tories, the governing parties in Westminster, are they simply too addicted to Russian cash?
Do you know, I participated in a debate yesterday on the Russian activity in Ukraine, and I talked about the long, or should I say, the modern history of the liberalisation of financial services and regulation in the UK. Let's remember this started under the premiership of Tony Blair. And if we look at the the Financial Standards Authority, their kind of mantra was, whatever happens between consenting adults, we don't get involved in. And that mantra continued into the future Conservative governments. And so we see today the situation in which, Londra Grad, as they like to call it, in London. And again, the sanctions that UK government put on the last couple of days, and the Prime Minister announcing this evening, let's see what he brings forward next week in legislation. I hope also that we see some more strategic decisions being made. Ian Blackford clear this afternoon again about making sure that the Russian Federation is excluded from the SWIFT system. It would be an utter disaster for the Russian economy. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure they would try and utilise the Chinese system, and China and Russia could work there, but it certainly would undermine their ability to finance their own political system and to feather their own nests. London's got a long way to go in this, and the Westminster parties have a lot to answer. And they really do need to make some serious changes, not just in the next couple of weeks. I'd heard the Prime Minister talking about bringing legislation for Easter. I was shocked at that. And given the fact that the Russian Federation is trying to invade Ukraine at this moment, waiting to Easter is far too long. It's just beggars belief. That was really shocked me about his speech, which I was listening to earlier this evening, that we're going to be looking at an Easter time frame for the implementations of these sanctions. And one other notable thing is that the former Leader of the House, I saw an article today which I think might be true, given it's probably coming from one of his own newspapers. I think it was in the Telegraph. We're saying that some of the money that he had, in several millions, in a Russian company, that he's taken that money out of that company in the last couple of days. Well, why would that not be a surprise to anybody? And my big fear is that a good part of that money is already flooding out of London into other safe havens. Just one final thing I would say, maybe, and I don't know if we're going to talk about oil or the gas supply, is that Europe has to really wean itself off the carbon footprint of Russia in the European economy. It's nearly, I think, £500 billion, or dollars, should I say, every week being paid to the Russian Federation for gas and oil. That needs to stop as quickly as possible. That's just no longer sustainable. We've been saying it for years. We are putting ourselves into the hands of an absolute oligarch, and here we are. And we're still giving them 500 billion a week. It's extraordinary.
Yep. The coming together of the need to reform consumption and production in Europe, the coming together of that with this crisis may yet be one of the longer term results of and perhaps unexpected implications for Putin, for Russia, and if it encourages Europe to make significant steps to decarbonize and to reorganize our energy systems, then that ultimately, I think, would be regarded as a positive step. You mentioned one more question about the UK. You mentioned your surprise at some of the statements that Boris Johnson was making, and also the news that the former leader of the House had disinvested from a Russian bank. Do you think that Johnson expected one of his major financial sponsors to go completely rogue like this, and as a result, the whole world to start talking about the suppressed and unenforced Russian report. How do you think Johnson's going to react? Is this, to steal a phrase, is this going to be his finest hour, or is he going to crumble into the sand like Eden did? Do you think these events are going to save Johnson's political career?
Well, I think what we've seen over the last couple of hours is that the President of the United States and the President of the European Commission worked coherently and together, arranging profound sanctions. I'm sure there are many of us who would think that not adding the SWIFT system would have made it more profound. I don't think the British government is anywhere near that at the moment. I think they're still an outlier on that. And I think that shows where they are at. Is he an Eden? I don't think so. Eden still had little bits of the empire left. He doesn't. And I think I think we're in a situation where the Prime Minister is still on the seat of his pants. Quite frankly, at one of the most profoundly difficult and sad times in modern European history. And I think, quite frankly, Boris Johnson will be a footnote in this, to be blunt. Yep,
I think the point you're making is absolutely right. The disconnection and the dislocation of UK politics from both from the Western Alliance and from the EU is being made plainer and plainer every day as these horrible events unfold.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that just briefly on that, having spoken to members of the armed forces over the last couple of years, excuse me, especially during Brexit, is their utter shock at that, and how whilst everyone talks about NATO, there is also this underlying political and diplomatic engagement which is essential to NATO working. And most of that was taking place through the European Union. And if you talk to senior members of the armed forces here in the UK, they would have said that Brexit has played a major part in undermining that ability of the UK to play a real big strategic part in European, if not global, defence.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martin. That's a very good point. I was going to move on finally in the context of discussing the events in Ukraine. To think a little bit about the implications for the citizens of the Ukraine. We've spoken about global matters and politicians, but it's people on the streets and people in the cities and the towns in Ukraine who are going to really bear this. Now, I know from things that you've done in the House of Commons and things that you've spoken about before, that your great-grandfather was killed during the Clydebank Blitz in March 1941. And that struck me because, as it happens, my grandfather was home from the Russian convoys at that time and was volunteering with the ARP and was in Clydebank that week. And apart from anything else, he could never speak ever about what he saw that week. And that always struck me very strongly. So, in thinking of the people in Ukraine, what do you think, who are now subject to a military invasion, what do you think the impact minds of Ukrainian citizens, and I'm thinking in particular of citizens who may very well not have a strong political position and who instead were very happy to be getting on with their lives, raising families and pursuing their wishes. What do you think the impact's going to be in the minds immediately in the minds of Ukrainian citizens? Martin, I think we've lost your mic.
Sorry about that.
There we go. Got you.
What I was saying, Andrew, is that on the way home tonight on the train from London, I was actually texting a friend, Zoryan, who is in Lviv at the moment. His partner had returned to Kiev for the day, and he's not back yet. So this is just folk trying to get on with their lives. Folk who would go out to work, travel a couple of 100 miles up the road to make sure everything's okay in Kiev, see what's going on with the family there, and we don't know if he's going to have his back yet in Lviv. So, that kind of struck home today when texting colleagues out in Ukraine, and they're saying, well, we've no idea where he is, and the phone lines, etc., and the mobile system keeps going down. That makes it very real that husbands, wives, partners, children will be separated, they will die, the Ukrainian nation is subjugated by a tyrant who, quite frankly, given his actions in Syria and in other parts of the world, you look at what they've done in Georgia, in Crimea. I think I can only think about my friends who are there at the moment, to Zorian and his partner. I hope that his partner gets home to Lviv tonight, and hopefully they can make it to the Polish border. That's the reality on the ground today. And that's
Exactly.
in 21st century Europe.
Yeah. So our thoughts are with your friends, but also with all the people in Ukraine who are now in a situation of unprovoked panic and terror and uncertainty for the future and for the futures of their families. I was going to take the experience from Clydebank one step further, very, very briefly. And as I understand it, part of the defence of Clydebank in March 1941 was from a destroyer which was tied up at the John Brown shipyard at the time. And it's perhaps not a surprise that that destroyer was a Polish vessel, the Pioneer, and it became involved in defending or attempting to defend Clydebank during the two nights of Blitz bombing. Do you think that there are lessons for us there with regard to cooperation, and in the current climate, particularly with regard to cooperation with Poland?
I think definitely on this month, or should I say next month, I'll be joining other bankies, and we will, as we always do, commemorate not only those we on the 13th and 14th of March, but we will commemorate those Polish members of Polish Armed Services, the Polish Navy, who were on the ORP Pioren and who sought to defend our hometown. And we have a long history of connection with the Polish Republic. And I think, if anything, what we can do, even while we're out of the European Union, is to work to enhance our cultural or economic ties. Hopefully, this will at least be some kind of push by the UK government to re-engage with our EU partners in a more equal footing. And also, yes, even with NATO, to make sure that Poland feels secure in its own sovereignty, in its own borders, and that it is a valued member of the European family of nations. There's no doubt in my mind, not just as a bankie, but as a Scot, that we have long connections with Poland, and that we need to make sure that Poland feels that not only Scotland, but the UK and the rest of its European neighbours will support and continue to support its own sovereign integrity.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martin. And one last thing with regard thinking about Ukrainian citizens and people. We know that President Zelensky has said that any citizen who wants a weapon can have one. And I've been told about Ukrainians who are already, in the last few months, who have been talking about learning lessons from the Irish War of Independence and the subsequent civil war in Northern Ireland, and thinking about how an asymmetric war or asymmetric resistance could be prosecuted against an army like or a military like the Russian military machine. And thinking then again about the position of Ukrainian people, do you think that that suggests that what we might now see is a longer lasting, lower intensity conflict across a huge country like Ukraine that may last for years now?
Well, I think I'd rather liken it to the Spanish Civil War, when you are fighting fascism. And Franco had to deal not only with Spanish civilians and military who were opposed to fascism, he had to deal with the International Brigade, many of them coming, of course, from here in Scotland. So I think there's a couple of elements here that the Russian Federation are probably not got their mind around yet, that there are probably 25 million Ukrainians across the world, if not more. I think there's about 40 million in Ukraine itself. I think the Ukrainian nation, and we will need to see how things pan out over the next couple of days, whether or not this taking up of arms will happen. I think it's one thing to say to people, you can take up arms and for it to be done. 1 minute where you're going down to the shops to buy milk and bread, and the next day you're taking up a pistol. It's not that easy. And that transition to become from a civilian to becoming I suppose a military home, a militarized home guard. If you're not ready for that, then that can be very difficult. That's a big step to ask any individual to take when they know that they still have food to put on the table for their families or for their loved ones, or to care for vulnerable relations. But we need to see how things work out in the next few days. But I think I would rather the analogy be the Spanish Civil War, because, and I hope it doesn't end the same way. I think there is an element here of standing up to what is tyranny from the Russian Federation, or should I say from Vladimir Putin, from his regime. And he has not countenanced the idea that there are at least another 25 million Ukrainians across the world who will take action economically, socially, and politically in other parts of the globe.
Thank you, Martin. All of that discussion with regard to the events in Ukraine, I'm extremely grateful to you for it and for all of your insight and your thoughts. What we'll do now is, if we may, we'll move on and we'll 2 or 3 other stories that are in the news today. Unsurprisingly, most of them have an angle and an aspect that relates to the invasion of Ukraine. But let's have a little look at these, because these stories also will affect your constituents and the people of Clydebank and of Scotland. So UK consumers have been warned to brace themselves for a substantial increase in the cost of living, including the prospect of £3,000 a year energy after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The price of gas and oil soared on the back of the news, leading to predictions of further rises in domestic bills. The AA and the RAC warned that diesel prices would start rising within days. Prices reached record levels. Analysts are warning that household gas and electricity bills could rise by a further £600 to £1,000 a year. That's increasing to up to as much as £3,000 a year after the Russian invasion pushed up wholesale gas prices by 28% on Thursday morning. Although UK households are not heavily reliant on Russian gas, concerns that supplies from the country will be disrupted have pushed up prices on the global wholesale market. After Germany halted the approval of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline this week, the Russian politician Dmitry Medvedev warned that natural gas prices could double in Europe. Oil prices, meanwhile, have risen to a 7-year high over similar about supplies from Russia. So, Martin, in his statement this afternoon, the Prime Minister spoke about, he said he would do everything to protect UK citizens from the financial impact of the invasion of Ukraine, and was talking specifically about the impact on energy prices. Now, it might be said that the approach of the UK government so far to the cost of living crisis, and in particular the increasing cost of energy, has been limited, shall we say, or has been pretty tentative. If we are faced with even greater increases in energy prices for domestic consumers, what do you think the UK government should do now?
We'll just say, first of all, it won't just be for the people of Clydebank, but it'll also be the folk of Dumbarton and the Vale of Leven, who I'm very proud to represent across the whole of Western Bartonshire. I think what's missing in this, and I think what the President of the United States was saying very strongly this evening from the White House, is that oil companies, especially those petroleum companies, should not be using this as an excuse to win additional profits out of hard-working Americans. I would say it's the exact same message to oil companies seeking to take extra profit from the hardworking people of Scotland. Don't even think about it. And I think the UK government should really be stepping up to the plate and saying, your profits are enough at the moment. You certainly can take a bit of the burden here, play your part. This is a very difficult situation for everybody, not just for the people of Ukraine, but for the entire global economy. And I think some of these oil and gas companies really need to play their part if they want to live in a democratic and free society in the West and to get the benefits of it. Start paying up yourself and playing your part.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martin. And also in that context, and thinking again about UK politics, 9 low-income families will be £500 a year worse off on average after the planned below-inflation increase in universal credit and other means-tested benefits are introduced in April, experts are beginning to say. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation has said that setting benefit rises at last September's 3.1% inflation rate when inflation is now forecast to hit 7% by April, will result in widespread hardship, pushing 400,000 people into poverty and ratcheting up pressure on households hit by the cost of living crisis. Couple families with children who are on low incomes, both in work and out of work, will experience a real terms cut of £500 a year, while pensioner couples will lose £540 a year, according to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation analysis. This comes 4 months after a £1,000 cut of incomes of households on universal credit, £20 a week top up to help claimants deal with the extra cost of COVID was withdrawn, and will hit families just as soaring energy bills start to bite. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation estimates that the net cost of uprating benefits by 7% would be £7.5 billion. So, Martin, it strikes me that we've had very large figures being bandied about in a number of ways in the past 2 or 3 weeks, not least in the context of spending which is now suggested to have been utterly wasted in the context of the procurement of PPE by the Westminster government and other measures with regard to the COVID response. So, do you think that the collision, I'll put it in those, of a cost of living crisis and an international crisis which will affect directly the cost of energy in people's homes, the collision of those two items with a dogmatic Tory government which appears to be determined to reintroduce austerity by any other name, not necessarily that austerity ever went away. Do you think that the nexus of those three items is going to force the Westminster government to change direction with regard to benefits and social security for citizens?
I think the simple answer, Andrew, is no. But let me maybe try and tie your big question there in a bit of an answer for you. But that was a simple answer. But I go back to an old mantra we had some time ago. You and I are probably old enough to remember it, the both of us. It's Scotland's oil. I would probably also put in it Scotland's gas. And even to today, whilst we do want to move off from a carbon economy into a green economy sustainably, is that about half of the UK's gas still comes from the North Sea. So, a very small part of Scotland, if not only the UK's gas comes from the Russian Federation. So we need to be very mindful of that. And if we had been an independent country, which like Norway had utilised that carbon investment back in the day, we would have, an appropriate national, wealth fund. And we wouldn't be in this situation where a lot of my constituents who are in work but require social security, I find the word welfare an aberration because it's us helping one another. And as someone who's used social security in my own life, it's an important part of looking after each other. And for so many families in my own constituency to suffer the removal of the £20 uplift and to see such increases, I just don't see how the UK system, the way it works, the complexity of its system, even with UC saying it's trying to make it even more simplified, without having the economic levers to change that policy direction, we are still going to be wedded to that Westminster model in which profit comes before people. And it's not difficult to see that we have lost so much already, but we can still gain by making sure that our green revolution is invested in the people of Scotland and not in the pockets of big companies, or for that matter, in the Treasury in London, without putting it back into people. I mean, even if you were if you're a unionist, I'm sure you'd even expect that the Treasury, especially during the UK government's levelling up fund, would be using some of that money to level up in a profound manner, and they're not.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martin. Both a short and succinct answer and a more rounded and crafted answer, which really rather makes the point as well. Thank you. We've got one other item that we'll look at this evening, which is a bit of a change of direction and perhaps a little bit of a change from the really pretty depressing stories that we've been looking at this evening, and that is that Andrew Marr has promised to ruffle feathers when he launches his new LBC radio show next month by taking advantage of the freedom he has gained by leaving the BBC. The former BBC political editor will host his own hour-long programme at 6 p.m. from Monday to Thursday. He previously said he was looking forward to getting my voice back after being freed from the BBC's impartiality requirements. While the national broadcaster is increasingly cracking down on any presenter who dares to express even a mild personal opinion, stations such as LBC are hitting record ratings by encouraging their hosts to take provocative political stances. Marr said, "I've always thought journalism is about breaking stories, ruffling feathers, and having some fun on the way. Anyone wanting bland, safe, weirdly predictable journalism is strongly advised to look elsewhere." The announcement means Eddie Mayer, another former BBC presenter, will have to give up the final hour of his LBC show to make way for Marr. The BBC has been hit hard by the increasingly competitive market for political journalism in the UK, which has seen deep-pocketed commercial media companies poach BBC presenters. Earlier this week, Global, the media company that owns BBC, hired John Sopel and Emily Maitlis from the BBC to host a new podcast. While Rupert Murdoch's News UK made large offers to hire BBC staff for its Times radio station and the forthcoming Talk TV service. Marr's LBC show will have also be broadcast live as a video stream, another indication that the division between radio and television is increasingly blurring. Marr gave up a £340,000 salary when he left the BBC, but will now hold a variety of jobs, including the New Statesman's chief political commentator and presenting a show on LBC's sister station, Classic FM. While BBC staff are required to declare outside earnings from paid speaking gigs, there is no such scrutiny for employees of commercial broadcasters. And it is not only on-air talent jumping ship from the BBC, but also the behind-the-scenes producers. Marr's show will be put together by former BBC staff, including the former political programming boss Rob Burley, who oversaw Marr's Sunday Politics show, as well as the Newsnight producer Matt Harris. So, Martin, in terms of the way in which the current UK media landscape is shifting, and an apparent stampede of talent and others from the BBC to commercial organisations, some of which are owned by proprietors who have a particular political standpoint. I'm looking at Murdoch. What do you think this says about the current state of public media in the UK and where it might be heading?
The Mayor or the Marshal? Listen, I'm not. I think I'd rather be reading The Ferret or watching Open Democracy online and getting some real, from what I perceive, investigative journalism that gets to the root and challenges all governments, not just the government in London, even our own, my own government here in Edinburgh. And so, I think these are the types of investigative journalism that people should be picking up and looking at. The stuff you get from people, also people like David Leask at the Herald as well, Peter Geedon at Open Democracy, some extraordinary investigative journalism. So I'd rather be downloading their podcasts and reading their articles than watching or listening to somebody getting paid probably £500,000 to spout an opinion on a radio station which is also broadcast online. So I'll leave that to that, I'm afraid.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martin. Well handled. And that was our final item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland, and you will find the link to do that on the screen now. We really need all of the financial assistance that we can get in order to continue doing what we do and to do more of what we do. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be here at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening, next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in then. But before then, I'd like to say thank you, many thanks to Martin Docherty-Hughes MP for his time and his insight and his reflections and his contributions to the programme this evening. Thank you, Martin.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to you and the team at Broadcasting Scotland. It's been really good to join you tonight.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you also to everybody for watching Scotland at 7 this evening. Please keep warm and keep well. Bye-bye.